the universal realm, and the one mind, finding your true self in the cosmic consciousness. Hello and welcome to this profound exploration into one of Buddhism's most expansive and transformative teachings. Today we journey into the heart of the Avatamsaka Sutra's vision of the Dharmadhatu, the universal realm, and the teaching of the one mind. These concepts might sound abstract at first, but they hold the keys to understanding who you really are and how you fit into the grand tapestry of existence. If you've ever looked up at the night sky and felt both incredibly small and mysteriously connected to something vast and beautiful, you've touched the edge of what we'll explore today. If you've ever had moments where the boundaries between yourself and the world seemed to dissolve, where you felt part of something much larger than your individual concerns, you've glimpsed the reality of the Dharmadhatu. The teachings we'll share today come from some of the most profound insights ever articulated about the nature of consciousness and reality. They offer not just philosophical understanding, but practical wisdom for healing the sense of separation and isolation that causes so much suffering in our modern world. These ancient teachings can help you discover that what you've been seeking outside yourself has been present within you all along. The word Dharmadhatu combines two Sanskrit terms that together point to something truly extraordinary. Dharma means the ultimate nature of reality, the cosmic principle that underlies all existence, the fundamental law that governs how things truly are. Dhatu means realm, element, or sphere. So Dharmadhatu refers to the universal realm of ultimate reality, the cosmic sphere where all phenomena exist in their most fundamental nature. But what does this actually mean for understanding your life and your place in the world? The Dharmadhatu is not some distant heaven or abstract philosophical concept. It's the deepest dimension of this very reality that you're experiencing right now. It's the underlying ground from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. It's the space of pure awareness in which all experiences arise and pass away. Think of it this way. Right now you're having various experiences, thoughts, emotions, sensations. All of these different experiences are arising in the space of your awareness, like waves arising in an ocean. The Dharmadhatu is like that ocean of awareness itself, the fundamental consciousness in which all experiences appear. It's not separate from your experiences, but it's the very ground that makes experience possible. The Avatamsaka Sutra teaches that this Dharmadhatu is not empty space, but is actually alive with infinite wisdom and compassion. It's not a blank void, but a fullness beyond description, pregnant with all possibilities. Every moment of your life, every thought you think, every person you meet, every experience you have, is a manifestation of this ultimate reality appearing in countless forms. This understanding can be profoundly comforting, especially when you're going through difficult times. Your struggles, your pain, your confusion are not accidents or mistakes. They're also expressions of the Dharmadhatu, opportunities for deeper understanding, invitations to recognize the unconditional love and wisdom that underlies even the most challenging experiences. The medieval Christian mystic Meister Eckhart spoke of something remarkably similar when he wrote about the ground of being from which all things emerge. He taught that there's a place in the soul that is so deep and fundamental that it was never born and never dies, a place where human consciousness and divine consciousness meet and are revealed to be one. The 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger explored what he called being itself, the fundamental reality that underlies all beings, but is more primordial than any particular thing that exists. He suggested that most of human anxiety and alienation comes from forgetting our connection to this deeper ground of existence. Contemporary physicist David Bohm proposed that reality consists of what he called the implicate order, an underlying wholeness from which all the separate things we observe emerge like waves from an ocean. He suggested that consciousness itself might be a fundamental aspect of this deeper reality, rather than just an emergent property of complex matter. The neuroscientist Eben Alexander, after his near-death experience, described encountering what he called the core, a realm of infinite love and consciousness that seemed to be the source and destination of all individual awareness. His scientific background led him to propose that consciousness might be more fundamental than matter, echoing the Dharmadhatu teaching that mind is the ground of all reality. But what does recognizing the Dharmadhatu mean for your daily life? First, it can help you understand that you're never actually separate from the source of wisdom and love that you're seeking. The peace you long for, the understanding you crave, the love you need, these aren't things you have to acquire from outside yourself. They're aspects of the Dharmadhatu that is your deepest nature. When you're feeling lost or confused, you can remember that these feelings are arising in the space of pure awareness that can never be lost or confused. When you're feeling unloved, you can recognize that the very capacity to feel, to long for love, is itself an expression of the love that permeates the Dharmadhatu. Your seeking is actually the Dharmadhatu seeking to know itself through your unique perspective. This doesn't mean you should bypass your human emotions or pretend that difficulties don't matter. Rather, it means you can hold your experiences within a larger context that provides both ground and perspective. Your individual life is like a unique melody being played by the infinite orchestra of the Dharmadhatu. Your particular notes, whether harmonious or discordant, contribute something irreplaceable to the cosmic symphony. You can begin to recognize the Dharmadhatu in everyday moments. When you're completely absorbed in a beautiful sunset, when you feel unconditional love for a child or pet, when you're moved to tears by music or poetry, when you experience moments of profound peace or clarity, you're touching the Dharmadhatu. These aren't special states you occasionally access, but glimpses of the reality that's always present, usually hidden only by the habits of attention that keep you focused on surface experiences. The practice of recognizing the Dharmadhatu is ultimately about coming home to yourself. Not the small self that worries and plans and judges, but the vast self that is your deepest nature, the self that is actually not separate from the cosmic ground of all existence. This is who you really are, and it's what you've been looking for all along. The Avatamsaka Sutra presents a remarkable framework for understanding the stages of awakening through what it calls the four Dharmadhatus. These represent progressively deeper levels of understanding reality, from the most ordinary way of seeing things to the most profound realization of how everything truly is. Understanding these stages can help you recognize where you are in your own journey of growth and what lies ahead. The first stage is called the Dharmadhatu of phenomena, or Shifaje in Chinese. This represents the ordinary way most people experience reality most of the time. At this level, you see things as separate, independent objects existing in space and time. You see yourself as a separate individual encountering other separate people and things. There's you, and there's the world out there, and you're trying to navigate between them to get what you want and avoid what you don't want. This isn't wrong or bad, it's actually a necessary starting point. You need to develop a healthy sense of individual identity before you can transcend it skillfully. You need to learn to function in the world of apparent separateness before you can discover the deeper unity that underlies it. Most of human life operates at this level, and there's nothing inferior about it. It's the foundation that makes deeper understanding possible. But staying only at this level can lead to suffering because you're constantly trying to manipulate circumstances to make yourself happy, constantly feeling threatened by things outside your control, constantly experiencing the stress of trying to maintain a separate self in a world that seems indifferent or hostile. You might achieve temporary satisfaction, but it never lasts because it's based on conditions that are always changing. The second stage is called the Dharma Dhatu of principle, or Lifajie. At this level, you begin to recognize the underlying unity that connects all apparently separate phenomena. You start to see that despite the appearance of multiplicity, there's actually one fundamental reality expressing itself in countless forms. This is like recognizing that all waves are actually just water, or that all the different colors of light are actually just different frequencies of the same electromagnetic energy. This recognition often comes through spiritual practice, philosophical study, or sometimes through spontaneous moments of insight. You might be meditating and suddenly recognize that the sense of being a separate observer, watching your breath, is an illusion, that there's just breathing happening in awareness. You might be in nature and suddenly feel that the boundaries between yourself and the landscape have dissolved, that there's just one life expressing itself as both perceiver and perceived. Understanding the Dharma Dhatu of principle can bring great relief because you realize you're not actually separate from the source of peace and wisdom you've been seeking. But it can also be challenging because your ego mind might resist this dissolution of boundaries. Sometimes people get stuck at this level, becoming attached to transcendent experiences or developing spiritual pride about their understanding of unity. The third stage is called the Dharma Dhatu of the non-obstruction between principle and phenomena, or Li Shi Wu Ai Fa Jie. This represents a more mature understanding where you recognize that unity and multiplicity, absolute and relative, transcendent and immanent, are not opposites but are actually two aspects of the same reality. You don't have to choose between acknowledging the ultimate oneness of everything and fully engaging with the relative world of relationships, responsibilities, and daily life. At this level, you can wash dishes as a spiritual practice not because you're pretending the dishes are an illusion, but because you recognize that the ultimate nature of reality is fully present in the activity of washing dishes. You can love someone deeply without trying to possess them, because you understand that your love for them is actually the universe loving itself through your particular perspective. This stage often develops through integrating spiritual insights with practical life experience. You learn to hold both the absolute view that everything is perfect as it is and the relative view that there's important work to be done to reduce suffering and increase wisdom and compassion in the world. You become what some traditions call a spiritual warrior, someone who is grounded in ultimate peace but fully engaged in the ongoing work of healing and awakening. The fourth and highest stage is called the Dharma Dhatu of the non-obstruction of phenomena with phenomena, or Shi Shi Wu I Fa Jie. This represents the full flowering of the Avatamsaka vision, where you recognize that every single thing contains every other thing, that all phenomena interpenetrate each other completely, that the entire universe is present in every grain of sand, and every grain of sand contains the entire universe. This is the realm of Indra's net that we explored earlier, but now experienced not just as a beautiful metaphor, but as the actual nature of your lived reality. Every person you meet, every experience you have, every moment of awareness is simultaneously completely itself and completely connected to everything else. There's no center and no periphery, no more important and less important, no self and other, just the infinite dance of interdependent manifestation. Very few people stabilize at this level of realization, but glimpses of it can occur at any stage of development. You might be having an ordinary conversation and suddenly recognize that you and the other person are both expressions of the same cosmic intelligence exploring itself through dialogue. You might be experiencing physical pain and simultaneously recognize that the pain, the resistance to pain, and the awareness that encompasses both are all equally sacred expressions of ultimate reality. These four stages are not necessarily sequential or permanent. You might have insights from the fourth stage while still working through challenges related to the first stage. The beauty of this framework is that it helps you understand that wherever you are in your development is perfectly appropriate, and it gives you a sense of the journey that lies ahead. What matters most is not trying to force yourself to a higher stage, but being honest about where you are and remaining open to deeper understanding. Each stage has its own gifts and its own challenges. Each stage teaches you something essential about the nature of reality and your place within it. And each stage, when embraced fully, naturally opens into the next. Perhaps the most profound and ultimately comforting teaching in the entire Avatamsaka Sutra is the doctrine of the one mind, or Yi Xin in Chinese. This teaching reveals that all of existence, including your individual consciousness, arises from and returns to a single universal mind that is pure awareness, infinite wisdom, and unconditional love. This isn't a personal mind belonging to some cosmic deity, but the fundamental nature of mind itself, the consciousness that underlies and pervades all experience. This might sound abstract, but it addresses one of the deepest sources of human suffering, the feeling of being isolated, separate, cut off from the source of life and meaning. The teaching of the one mind reveals that this separation is ultimately an illusion created by limited identification with thoughts, emotions, and experiences that arise and pass away in the space of infinite awareness. Think of it this way. Right now, you're having thoughts, but you're not identical to your thoughts. Thoughts arise in your awareness and then disappear, but your awareness remains. You're having emotions, but you're not identical to your emotions. Emotions come and go, but the awareness in which they appear is constant. You're having sensory experiences, but you're not identical to these experiences. Sights, sounds, sensations appear in your awareness and then fade, but awareness itself is always present. The one mind is this awareness that you already are, but it's not limited to your individual perspective. It's the same awareness that every conscious being experiences, the same awareness in which all phenomena appear. When you look into another person's eyes, the awareness looking out through their eyes is the same awareness looking out through yours. The boundaries between individual minds are like waves on the ocean, real from one perspective, but ultimately just temporary modifications of the same water. This understanding can transform how you relate to your own experience. When you're going through difficult emotions like sadness, fear, or anger, you can learn to rest in the awareness that contains these emotions rather than identifying completely with them. The sadness is real, but you are the space in which sadness appears. The fear is genuine, but you are the awareness that remains unshaken even when fear is present. This doesn't diminish the reality of your emotions, but it provides a stable ground that can't be disturbed by changing mental and emotional weather. The great Indian philosopher Adi Shankara taught something remarkably similar through the concept of Brahman, the ultimate reality that is pure consciousness, existence, and bliss. He proposed that individual consciousness, or Atman, is actually identical to universal consciousness, or Brahman. The famous Upanishadic teaching Tattvamasi, meaning that thou art, points to this same recognition that your deepest nature is not separate from the ultimate nature of reality itself. Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart and Johannes Thaler spoke of the quote of the soul, where individual consciousness and divine consciousness meet and are revealed to be one. Eckhart famously said that God's ground is the soul's ground, and the soul's ground is God's ground, pointing to the same non-dual awareness that the Avatamsaka calls the one mind. The contemporary spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle writes extensively about what he calls presence, or the now, which is the timeless awareness in which all experiences arise. He suggests that recognizing this presence as your true identity is the key to ending psychological suffering and discovering lasting peace and joy. Neuroscience is providing fascinating insights that parallel these ancient teachings. Research on meditation shows that sustained practice can lead to experiences where the sense of being a separate self temporarily dissolves, while awareness remains perfectly clear and present. Studies of psychedelic experiences suggest that the brain networks responsible for maintaining a sense of separate self can be temporarily quieted, leading to experiences of unity consciousness that participants often describe as more real than ordinary waking consciousness. The Harvard psychiatrist and researcher of consciousness, Dr. Stanislav Grof, has documented thousands of cases where people in non-ordinary states of consciousness have experienced what he calls cosmic consciousness, a state where individual awareness recognizes itself as part of a universal field of consciousness. His research suggests that these experiences, far from being hallucinations, might actually be glimpses of deeper levels of reality, normally filtered out by our everyday mental processes. But what does recognizing the one mind mean for dealing with practical challenges in your daily life? First, it can provide an unshakable foundation of peace and stability. When you know that your deepest nature is the awareness that can never be damaged or destroyed, you can face difficult circumstances with greater equanimity. Your job situation might be uncertain, your relationships might be challenging, your health might be fragile, but the awareness that you are remains constant and indestructible. Second, it can help you relate to other people with greater compassion and understanding. When you recognize that the consciousness looking out through another person's eyes is the same consciousness looking out through yours, conflicts become less personal and forgiveness becomes more natural. You're not condoning harmful behavior, but you're recognizing the shared humanity and shared consciousness that underlies even difficult interactions. Third, it can help you approach your personal growth and healing from a place of wholeness rather than deficiency. Instead of thinking you need to acquire peace, wisdom, or love from outside yourself, you can recognize that these qualities are aspects of the one mind that is your true nature. Your spiritual practice becomes not about getting somewhere else, but about removing the obstacles that prevent you from recognizing what you already are. You can begin to recognize the one mind in everyday moments of awareness, when you're completely present with whatever you're experiencing, when you're listening deeply to music or to another person, when you're absorbed in creative activity, when you experience moments of love or beauty that seem to dissolve the boundaries of your ordinary sense of self, you're touching the one mind. These moments remind you that beneath all the stories and dramas of your individual life, there's a vast, peaceful, loving awareness that is who you really are. While the teachings about the Dharmadhatu and the one mind might seem like lofty philosophical concepts, the Avatamsaka Sutra is ultimately a practical guide for living with greater wisdom, compassion, and freedom. The question isn't whether you can understand these ideas intellectually, but whether you can integrate them into your daily experience in ways that reduce suffering and increase genuine happiness for yourself and others. One of the most practical applications of Dharmadhatu awareness is in how you approach problems and challenges. From the ordinary perspective of the first Dharmadhatu, problems are obstacles that shouldn't be there, enemies to be defeated or avoided. This approach often increases suffering because you're constantly fighting against circumstances that are actually part of the natural flow of life. From the perspective of Dharmadhatu awareness, problems are still problems that need practical solutions, but there are also opportunities for deeper understanding and growth. A difficult relationship isn't just a source of stress, it's a mirror showing you aspects of yourself that need attention. A health challenge isn't just an inconvenience, it's an invitation to develop courage, patience, and appreciation for the preciousness of life. Financial difficulties aren't just practical obstacles. They're opportunities to examine your relationship with security and to discover sources of wealth that don't depend on external circumstances. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop working to improve your situation. Rather, you approach challenges from a place of inner stability and wisdom, rather than from reactive fear or anger. You can work diligently toward solutions while remaining grounded in the peace that comes from knowing your deepest nature can't be threatened by changing circumstances. Another practical application is in your relationships with other people. When you remember that everyone is an expression of the same universal consciousness appearing in different forms, it becomes easier to respond to difficult behavior with patience and compassion. You don't enable harmful actions, but you can set boundaries and protect yourself without hatred or resentment. You begin to see that when someone is being hostile or unkind, they're actually suffering themselves, cut off from their connection to the peace and love that is their true nature. Your compassionate response might help them remember that connection, or it might not, But either way, you remain grounded in your own inner peace, rather than being pulled into reactive patterns. This perspective is particularly helpful in intimate relationships. Instead of trying to change your partner to meet your needs, you can appreciate them as a unique expression of universal consciousness, while taking responsibility for your own emotional well-being. You can love them more freely because you're not depending on them to complete you or make you happy in ways that only come from recognizing your own fundamental wholeness. In your work life, Dharmadhatu awareness can help you find meaning and purpose even in mundane tasks. Whether you're washing dishes, entering data, teaching children, or managing a business, you can recognize that you're participating in the cosmic activity of consciousness, knowing itself through countless forms of expression. This doesn't make you less professional or less committed to excellence, but it helps you work from a place of service rather than just personal ambition. You can also apply these teachings to how you relate to your own thoughts and emotions. Instead of being carried away by every mental and emotional current, you can rest in the awareness that remains stable even when thoughts and emotions are turbulent. This isn't about suppressing your feelings, but about not losing yourself in them completely. When anxiety arises, you can notice that you are the awareness in which anxiety appears rather than thinking, "I am anxious." When anger comes up, you can observe it with compassion rather than either expressing it destructively or pushing it away. When sadness is present, you can hold it tenderly in the space of loving awareness rather than being overwhelmed by it. Perhaps most practically, these teachings can help you develop what psychologists call distress tolerance and emotional regulation. When you know that your fundamental nature is vast, peaceful awareness, you can allow difficult experiences to be present without being destroyed by them. You develop confidence that you can handle whatever arises, because you're grounded in something unshakable. You can begin practicing Dharmadhatu awareness in small, simple ways. When you're walking, occasionally remember that the consciousness walking is the same consciousness that animates the trees, the birds, the other people you encounter. When you're eating, appreciate that you're participating in the cosmic process of transformation, where the energy of the sun, captured by plants, becomes part of your body and consciousness. When you're in conversation, practice listening not just to the words, but to the consciousness expressing itself through the other person. When you're alone, enjoy the spacious awareness that's present, even when there's nothing particular to be aware of. These small recognitions gradually transform how you experience everyday life, making it less of a struggle and more of a sacred participation in the universal dance of consciousness. The journey of recognizing your true nature in the Dharmadhatu is ultimately a journey of coming home to yourself. Not the small, worried, strategic self that's trying to navigate a dangerous world, but the vast, peaceful, loving self that you've always been beneath all the surface turbulence. This is perhaps the most profound gift that the Avatamsaka teachings offer. The recognition that what you've been seeking has been present all along, waiting patiently for you to remember who you really are. One of the most transformative aspects of the Avatamsaka teaching is how it can revolutionize your understanding of who you are and what your life is really about. In our culture, we're often encouraged to define ourselves through our roles, achievements, possessions, relationships, or personal history. But these Dharmadhatu teachings invite you to discover an identity that's much vaster and more stable than any of these changing conditions. The process of self-discovery through Dharmadhatu awareness often begins with what psychologists call disidentification. You start to notice that you are not your thoughts, because thoughts come and go while you remain. You realize you are not your emotions, because emotions arise and pass away, while your essential nature is constant. You recognize you are not your body, because your body is constantly changing while something in you feels continuous and unchanging. This can initially be disorienting because so much of our culture encourages us to identify strongly with our thoughts, feelings, and physical appearance. But as you become more comfortable with this disidentification, it becomes profoundly liberating. You begin to realize that all the things you were worried about losing, all the things you thought defined your worth, are actually just temporary appearances in the space of your fundamental being. Carl Jung's concept of individuation parallels this process in many ways. Jung saw psychological maturity as involving the integration of different aspects of the psyche, while discovering what he called the self, with a capital S, a deeper center of identity that transcends the ego's concerns. He recognized that this self is both deeply personal and mysteriously connected to universal patterns and energies. The contemporary psychologist Ken Wilber has written extensively about what he calls vertex experiences, moments where people spontaneously recognize their identity with universal consciousness. His research suggests that these experiences, rather than being pathological or escapist, actually represent healthy development toward what he calls integral awareness, where individual and universal perspectives are held simultaneously. Transpersonal psychology, founded by researchers like Stanislav Grof and Francis Vaughan, studies exactly these kinds of expanded identity experiences. Their research indicates that recognizing yourself as more than your personal history and psychological patterns is associated with increased creativity, compassion, resilience, and overall well-being. But what does this expanded sense of identity mean for dealing with practical psychological challenges? Paradoxically, recognizing your universal nature often makes you more capable of handling personal difficulties skillfully. When you know that your essential being can't be damaged, you can face your psychological patterns with curiosity rather than fear. If you struggle with anxiety, for example, you can explore the anxiety from the stable ground of awareness rather than being completely overwhelmed by it. You might notice that anxiety feels like a contraction in the space of consciousness, that it has particular sensations and thought patterns, that it comes and goes like weather in the sky of your being. This perspective doesn't make the anxiety disappear immediately, but it gives you space to work with it more skillfully. If you have patterns of depression, recognizing your nature as pure awareness can provide a foundation that doesn't depend on your mood states. Depression might still arise, but you begin to see it as a temporary clouding of your naturally clear awareness, rather than as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. This can help you seek appropriate support without the additional suffering of thinking that depression defines who you are. The same applies to patterns of anger, addiction, or any other psychological challenges. From the perspective of Dharmadhatu awareness, these patterns are like clouds in the sky of your being. They're real, they might need attention and care, but they don't define the sky itself. This understanding often makes it easier to seek help when needed, because you're not protecting a fragile sense of identity that feels threatened by acknowledging problems. This expanded identity also tends to naturally increase what psychologists call self-compassion. When you recognize that your struggles are temporary modifications of vast, loving awareness, it becomes easier to treat yourself with the kindness you would offer a good friend. You stop expecting yourself to be perfect because you understand that growth and learning, including making mistakes, are natural expressions of consciousness exploring itself. Many people find that as they stabilize in Dharma Dhatu awareness, their relationships become more authentic and satisfying. Because you're not desperately trying to get other people to validate or complete your sense of identity, you can appreciate them more freely for who they are. You can offer support without trying to control outcomes, and you can receive love without the anxiety that comes from feeling fundamentally unworthy. Your creative expression often flourishes as well because you're no longer so invested in protecting a limited sense of self. You can take creative risks, explore new possibilities, and share your authentic perspective without being crushed by criticism or inflated by praise. You begin to see your creative activity as the universe expressing itself through your unique perspective rather than as something you need to do to prove your worth. Perhaps most importantly, this self-discovery process tends to naturally awaken what the Avatamsaka calls bodhicitta, the compassionate intention to help all beings recognize their true nature and find freedom from suffering. When you discover that your deepest identity is universal consciousness appearing as an individual, you naturally care about the welfare of all the other expressions of that same consciousness. This isn't a burden or obligation imposed from outside, but a spontaneous flowering of love that arises when you see through the illusion of separation. Just as your right hand naturally helps your left hand when it's injured, without thinking about whether it's worth the effort, you begin to naturally want to help other beings because you recognize them as other expressions of your own deepest self. This journey of self-discovery through Dharma Dhatu awareness is not about reaching some final destination where you'll be permanently enlightened and free from all challenges. Rather, it's about establishing yourself in a perspective that can hold all of life's experiences with greater wisdom, compassion, and freedom. It's about coming home to who you've always been beneath all the stories and strategies and struggles of your personal life. You can begin this exploration gently, in whatever way feels natural to you. Sometimes it starts with meditation practice, sometimes through therapy or self-reflection, sometimes through creative expression, sometimes through experiences in nature, sometimes through loving relationships that help you feel safe enough to let your guard down. What matters is not the particular doorway you use, but your willingness to explore the question of who you really are beneath all the roles and identities you've collected. In our exploration of the Dharma Dhatu and the One Mind, we've journeyed through some of the most profound teachings ever articulated about the nature of reality and consciousness. We've seen how these ancient insights offer both philosophical understanding and practical wisdom for living with greater freedom, compassion, and peace. We began by understanding the Dharma Dhatu as the universal realm of ultimate reality, not some distant dimension, but the deepest nature of this very experience you're having right now. We discovered that recognizing this dimension of existence can provide an unshakable foundation of peace that remains stable even when life circumstances are challenging and uncertain. We explored the four Dharma Dhatus as a map for understanding different levels of awakening, from seeing things as separate objects to recognizing the complete interpenetration of all phenomena. This framework can help you understand where you are in your own development and appreciate that every stage of growth has its own gifts and importance. We delved into the teaching of the One Mind, the recognition that your individual consciousness is actually an expression of universal consciousness, like a wave that is completely water. This understanding can transform how you relate to your thoughts and emotions, helping you rest in the awareness that contains all experiences rather than being completely identified with them. We examined practical applications of these teachings for daily life, relationships, work, and personal challenges. Far from being abstract philosophy, Dharma Dhatu awareness offers concrete ways to approach problems with greater wisdom, love others more freely, and find meaning and purpose even in ordinary activities. And we explored how these teachings can revolutionize your understanding of who you are, helping you discover an identity that's much vaster and more stable than your changing thoughts, emotions, circumstances, or personal history. This expanded sense of self often leads to greater creativity, authenticity, and natural compassion for all beings. Perhaps most importantly, we've seen how these teachings address one of the deepest sources of human suffering, the illusion of separation. Whether you're feeling lonely, anxious, confused, or overwhelmed, the Dharma Dhatu teachings remind you that you are never actually separate from the source of peace, wisdom, and love that you're seeking. These qualities are not foreign imports that you need to acquire, but aspects of your own deepest nature that you can learn to recognize and embody. This doesn't mean that life becomes easy or that you'll never face challenges, but it does mean that you can face whatever arises from a place of fundamental stability and confidence. You can work toward positive changes while knowing that your essential well-being doesn't depend on achieving particular outcomes. You can love deeply while respecting the freedom and autonomy of others. You can engage fully with life while holding everything lightly. The invitation of these teachings is not to believe them intellectually, but to explore them experientially. You can begin simply by paying attention to the awareness that's present right now as you hear or read these words. Notice that thoughts and sensations are arising and passing away, but awareness itself remains constant. Notice that you can be aware of being aware, that consciousness is not just the light by which you see, but is somehow what you most fundamentally are. You can experiment with remembering your connection to the Dharma Dhatu throughout your day. When you're washing dishes, remember that the consciousness doing the washing is the same consciousness that flows in the water and grows in the plants that provided the food. When you're walking, appreciate that the awareness moving through space is the same awareness that animates the trees, the birds, the other people you encounter. When you're in conversation, practice listening not just to words, but to the consciousness expressing itself through the other person. When you're alone, enjoy the spacious presence that's available, even when there's nothing particular to do or think about. These small recognitions can gradually transform your entire experience of being alive. Most importantly, be patient and gentle with yourself in this exploration. The Dharma Dhatu teachings point to what you already are, not to some special state you need to achieve. Your true nature as universal consciousness appearing in individual form is not something you can lose or damage, though it can be temporarily obscured by habits of attention that focus exclusively on surface experiences. Like the sun that remains bright even when hidden by clouds, your fundamental nature as vast, peaceful, loving awareness is always present, waiting patiently for you to remember. Sometimes the clouds part spontaneously. Sometimes contemplative practice helps clear them. Sometimes they're dissolved by love or beauty or moments of profound presence. However it happens, the recognition is always a homecoming, a return to what you've never actually left. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of the Dharma Tattva and the One Mind. May these teachings serve as doorways to recognizing your own vast and beautiful nature. May you find in them not just interesting ideas, but living wisdom that transforms how you experience yourself and your relationship to all of life. In recognizing the universal realm that is your deepest home, may you discover the peace, freedom, and love that have been waiting for you all along.